Yana nai nai nai. Yana nai nai nai. Yana nai nai nai. Yana nai 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 nai. Nai 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 nai. Nai nai nai. Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much. It is so beautiful to see so many of you here to come and learn in this last hour of Shabbat. There's something so special about the last hour of Shabbat as the light outside begins to wane, as we begin to prepare our hearts and souls to say goodbye to Shabbat, as we think about what has transpired in the recent past through the last 24 hours and prepare ourselves for what it is that lies ahead. Some of you have heard me share this story before about this last hour of Shabbat being so pregnant with spiritual possibilities, such a meaningful, powerful hour of our beloved sacred day of Shabbat, that there is a community in South Beach, Miami, that it's the Chabad of South Beach. And for those communities who don't use electricity on Shabbat, you know, I grew up in an Orthodox home. We didn't use electricity on Shabbat, so our home was filled with timers. Right. So my mother would set the timer in the dining room to go off at a certain hour, right? And depending on who she invited for dinner that Shabbos, we, the kids, would sometimes turn it to go off a little earlier, right? If we wanted to get rid of those people. But late Shabbos afternoon, the timer was always set to go back on, so we could continue to read or do whatever we wanted to do. At the Chabad of South Beach, when the light begins to dim and the community gathers, as many do, to sing, to learn, to reflect, they adjust their timers to turn the lights off. Not to add more light, but to actually provide the cover of darkness. Why? Because this is an hour that is meant to be so evocative. It's meant to move us and to touch us so deeply in thinking about who we are and who we're called to be, that the community wants to provide the cover of darkness to provide a little bit of privacy for people to feel the emotions that well up and to express the emotions that well up. And so, well, we're not going to turn the lights off so that I can continue to see the notes in front of me. I do want to invite you to think of that spiritual energy and to take a deep breath and to be in this space with that sense of openness, that sense perhaps even of vulnerability that paradoxically fortifies us for all that lies ahead. I want to offer in the next little while until we make Havdalah together 3.5 teachings. 3.5 teachings. 3 that I prepared to share with you tonight, and one that has emerged over the last several hours that I feel compelled to make a comment on. And I will before we make Havdalah. I want to offer these 3 teachings and then hopefully have time to open up for some comments, questions, and reflections from you. So I opened up with this nigun that many of us associate with the Sheva Brachot that we chant under the chuppah. If you've ever been to a wedding where different people are called up to make the Sheva Bracha, sometimes waiting for that person to get up, that time is filled with yana nai nai nai, yana nai nai nai. It's a melody about partnership, about covenant, about, in many ways, the social contract. So I want to offer a teaching using a theme that I learned some words to frame from my friends Michael and Marcy Billig just a few nights ago. The theme of optional mandatory, and how those go together, actually, that they don't contradict each other. I offered a teaching this morning based on the thinking of Yoram Chazoni in a very powerful book of his called The Dawn, all about the Purim story. He recently revised that book. I encourage you to read it. To Chazoni, ancient Persia represented a major paradigm shift for Jewish living, in that it was the first time that anybody could truly choose not to be Jewish. Right, if you think about it, in Egypt, when we were forced into slavery, you were compelled to be identified with that group of people, right? You were compelled by forces from without into a sense of Jewish identity and forced Jewish belonging. In ancient Canaan, as we were constantly at war with the surrounding nations, because it was such a tribally framed society, you were perforce identified as an Israelite, as a Jew. Now, violating any sense of Torah law might have put you at odds with your God, but there was almost nothing you could do to put you at odds with your people. Think about that. In the wake of the Khurban, the destruction of the temple, in the wake of the exile, for the first time, Jews were encountering different cultures and different identities which were theirs for the taking, if they wanted to adopt them. It was the first time that someone could choose not to be Jewish. It was the first time that someone could pursue an exit ramp off of that identity. And if they actually wanted it, they had to make the effort to go out and find it. So dispersed were we throughout those lands and throughout those cultures. And that's why in the latter chapters of the Scroll of Esther, in the Megillah, using that phrase, kimu v'kiblu, that the Jewish community, they established and took upon themselves the holiday of Purim. It was understood to represent a second affirmation of the covenant of the Brit that was the longest lasting affirmation of the Brit, precisely because it was the one entered into from a voluntary, willful embrace of that Jewish identity and of those Jewish commitments. The first time standing at Sinai, the rabbis understood that that covenant was entered into almost by force. In Midrashic language, they saw the mountain of Sinai held by God over the people, and God actually saying, if you accept my covenant, wonderful. If you don't, prepare to die. And the mountain would fall upon them. And after all, what choice did anybody have? They had just been redeemed from Egypt, liberated from slavery. If the God who says, I'm the one who took you out, now says, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, what are you going to say? But that's problematic, right? We know from later halachic literature, no covenant that's entered into by force has any lasting legal significance. And here in the Purim story, we see the free, voluntary embrace of Judaism by that generation. And it's interesting, actually, that the rabbis extrapolate this seismic covenantal moment from an exilic community of mostly secular, highly assimilated Jews. Jews who thought nothing of marrying Esther to King Ahasuerus. Jews who thought nothing of what was she going to eat in the palace and how was she going to keep Shabbos. And you cannot imagine the fanciful imagination of the rabbis trying to explain those questions that the text suggests were not really burning questions at all. From this community, the rabbis derived the most lasting, most important covenantal affirmation of the Jewish people. Optional, mandatory. But there's something even more powerful. Mordechai realized that for this generation of Jews who did not find Jewish observance or religious tradition a motivating goad towards that sense of affiliation, and who could just as easily have slid into Persian culture completely through language and dress and names as we saw, he realized we needed a newly imagined source of Jewish inspiration, a newly articulated sense of Jewish responsibility. And the Purim story provides this framing by emphasizing the urgency of what it means for Jews to stand up for themselves and their people, for Jews to stand up and fight for Jewish survival. And doing so would secure not just physical safety for the Jews and the potential for them to thrive as individuals in a setting that was not theirs to design and not theirs to rule, but it would allow for the continuity of Judaism and the Jewish people even in this foreign homeland. Shifting the source of salvation and redemption from God to human initiative, as Esther and Mordechai do, launches an entirely new paradigm of Jewish engagement, where the Jewish drive to connect, to belong, to participate, derives not from a sense of God-mandated commandments, but from the well springs of human yearnings, yearnings for connection to one's people, to one's culture, to one's past, and to one's destiny. Sound familiar? Yeah. Maybe this is ancient Persia after all. Even the rabbis recognize this in part in a very powerful midrash that Yoram Chazoni brings in his book. He calls his book The Dawn, and it comes from this midrash where the rabbis actually call Esther the dawn, Shachar. And he quotes from them, when is it truly dark? When is it really pitch black in the sky? It's really pitch black at the moment of dawn, when the moon disappears and the stars disappear and the constellations go as well. There is no more darker hour than that one, the rabbis teach. And that's when God brings out the light of dawn from within that complete darkness. And they say Esther too brought out the light of salvation in rescuing her people from the bleakest moment of despair and vulnerability. She brings that light from within her own power, her own initiative, her own creation, her own bringing of a new day and a new light. Esther, of course, is a name from Persian, Ishtar, which means goddess of heaven, or from the Greek word Aster, which means star. And unlike the Persians who used astrology or who chose lots based on the zodiac to decide their fate, she, a human being, was the star that would guide the efforts to save her people and her culture. She was the light that paved the way to a Jewish framework that relied not on God to do the heavy lifting, or even not on the human ability to hear the voice of God commanding us to do the lifting, but on her own initiative to build a world of love and justice. And the proof, the strength of this new paradigm, comes from Mordechai establishing Purim as a new holiday on the Jewish calendar. And it's understood that he was the first person since Moses to declare a Jewish festival. Like, think what it takes to say, I'm going to introduce a new Jewish holiday on the Jewish calendar. The fact that Mordechai could add a yontif, so to speak. Okay, it's not yontif, but you know what I mean. The fact that he could add a new festival is an indication of the strength of this paradigm. A couple of years ago, I interviewed Jonathan Ornstein, who is the executive director of the JCC in Krakow. And Jonathan Ornstein was introducing, I'm not sure how successful he's been, introducing a new Jewish day of I don't know what I would call it, a new day on the Jewish calendar, a day that recognizes survivors of the Shoah. I don't think that had been done in millennia. But Mordechai makes sure that people celebrate, that they have festive meals, that they give each other gifts, mishloach manot, and help each other who are needy, matanot le'evyonim. All of those mitzvot that we identify with Purim are the mark of a strong and safe and self-sufficient community. Self-sufficient spiritually, self-sufficient physically. Optional, mandatory. How do we see those words not as contradictory, but as powerfully synergistic in our 21st century landscape of Jewish engagement? That is today's million-dollar challenge, if you will. How do we cultivate a sense of obligation and responsibility in a world that privileges independent, voluntary commitment? Optional, mandatory. I invite you to think about what the lessons of this teaching are for us, for our children, and for our grandchildren. What the strengths of this insight are, what the weaknesses might be. What is gained and what is lost when we live as Jews in the world of optional, mandatory. Nai, 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 nai. Ya na nai, 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 nai. Ai, nai, 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 nai. Yedid Nefesh, a nigun about intimacy, about soulful love, a sense of intimacy which is sometimes bred less from proximity and even from distance. We all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Penny for bringing us together this afternoon to study Torah in memory of your brother Tony. In that dialectic of absence and presence, you've given us the opportunity to experience how the study of Torah can generate a deep sense of presence for someone who's absent. And I want to build on that theme and share a teaching about how absence and presence live together. Because today is a Shabbat of absence. In both Parashat Tetzaveh, that we read this morning, and the holiday of Purim, which begins Monday night, there are glaring absences. Scholars throughout the generations have commented on the striking absence of God in Megillat Esther. And Parshat Tetzaveh similarly omits, for the first time since his birth, recorded back in the beginning of the book of Exodus, any mention of Moshe Rabbeinu, the one and only Parsha, the leader who took us out of Mitzrayim, and who in the current cycle of weekly readings is bringing us the Torah and the mitzvot, which will continue to shape our lives as Jews and as human beings forever. And what might these two glaring omissions or forgettings, the omission of God from the story of Purim, the omission of Moshe from the Torah reading, on this Shabbat of remembering, Shabbat Zachor, what might those forgettings teach us? Rav Yitzchak Hutner explained how the absence of God or of any explicit divine miracles in the Purim story is less an omission of God and more the Torah's summoning to us as human beings to be the ones to generate holiness in our world, especially in times of darkness and vulnerability. As we said earlier and also this morning, we live in a time that we cannot forget is a time filled with great potential and great hope for humanity, for nature and the environment, for the Jewish people. But as we see painfully over and over again, we cannot rely on anyone else, and certainly not God, to do the hard and courageous work that lies ahead of us. when we find the strength, when we find the conviction to stand up for what it is that we believe in, for what we value, the message that we send is not that God has abandoned us, but quite the contrary. The message is that we have been given the opportunity and the power to bring with our own hands, with our own minds, with our own souls, with our own resources, the presence of the divine into the world. And as we've said, that's the lasting legacy of Mordechai and Esther. Change the course of history, stepping into the breach. Showing us how to add our own voices to the ever-unfolding stories of humanity and of our people. The omission of Moshe's name from Parshat Tetzaveh brings a related lesson. Think of how many times Moshe's name appears in the Chumash. Okay, we understand why his name doesn't appear in Sefer Bereshit, because he wasn't born yet. And in Devarim, in the book of Deuteronomy, his name appears only a few times, but that's because most of the book is a 37-day-long speech that he's giving to Bnei Yisrael before he dies. Yeah, and you people complain that rabbis speak too long? 37 days. But in the books of Shemot and Vayikra and Bamidbar, his name is all over the place. Sometimes in a single column, in a single page, except in one place, in our Parsha today, Parshat Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh continues the description of the building of the Mishkan, the desert sanctuary, which is also all about the Kohen Gadol and the installation of all the other priests who would provide the ritual leadership in the Mishkan, and then later on in the Beit HaMikdash, the temple in Jerusalem. But let's take a step back for a moment and think how unusual it is that the Torah would assign the kehunah, would assign the lofty role of the priesthood to anyone other than Moshe. I mean, who could be more deserving? Right? Think about it. He was the one who spoke face to face with God. He was the one who directly received the Torah. He was the one who understood better than anyone the significance and the meaning of the mitzvot. And not only is somebody else in their family chosen for the kehunah, okay, it's his brother, but it's not him. This portion where that other family is chosen is the one parsha where Moshe is not even mentioned? Did it have to be that stark? And while there are many different explanations for Moshe's absence here, there is one that I think speaks directly to what it means to be a member of the Jewish community. It's a subtle shift, but I want to invite you to think about Moshe being left out of this part of the story, not as him being intentionally marginalized, but rather as him willingly removing himself so that others, in this case Aaron and his sons, could enjoy the kavod, enjoy the respect, enjoy the zechut, the privilege of being assigned a leadership role within the community. If the lesson of the omission of God's name in the Megillah is about seeing ourselves as human agents of change and of redemption in our own lives, and asserting the importance of us doing that holy work, then perhaps the lesson of the omission of Moshe's name in Parshat Tetzaveh is about making room for others to do the same. It's about showing leadership as communal leaders, as parents, as friends, as partners, by sometimes making ourselves small in order to grant someone else the opportunity to be great. In the same way, the Kabbalistic tradition teaches us that God made God's self small in order to make room for the other manifestations of reality. That's what it means to be in and of community, allowing everyone's voices, everyone's experiences and dreams, not just our own, to help shape destiny, not only theirs, but even ours, and that of humanity. The Mishkan, which we're reading about in these last 5 parashiot of the book of Shemot, conveys the same lesson. The Mishkan was known by 2 terms. It was known as a Mishkan, literally a dwelling place, a home for the divine presence to live not just within it, but within us. But it was also known as an ohel, as a temporary shelter which would move along with us in our wilderness trek, continually set up and dismantled as we traveled through the desert. In the same way that a tent can be made bigger or smaller, round or square as our needs demand, our sacred spaces, our communities, our homes, in addition to our hearts, are meant to be adapted on an ongoing basis so that they can be inclusive of our ever-evolving lives as Jews, but so that they can also be inclusive of each and every one of us, making space for holiness to dwell not just within those spaces, but within all who call those spaces home. On this Shabbat Zachor, Shabbat of Remembrances, I want to invite us to recall not just the threats of Haman and the disappearance or absence of God, but also the godly courage and conviction generated by Mordechai and Esther. And on this Parashat Tetzaveh, I want to invite us to focus not just on the absence of Moshe, but on the Mishkan's lessons of creating space for communities and families and individuals to live and to together build the Jewish future in spaces that are dynamic, evolving, expansive, and inclusive. And so as we bring this teaching to a close, I ask you to think about who in today's world might be feeling left out of our Jewish spaces. Who in our Jewish world might be feeling like there just doesn't seem to be enough room for them? Have you ever felt that there isn't enough room for you? And in what ways can we, in our families and our communities, create more space? I meant to sing a different nigun. Nai na nai 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 nai. Ai na nai 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 nai. Ai na nai nai nai. Ai nai 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 nai. Ai na nai 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 nai. Ai na nai nai nai. Ai nai nai nai. Ai na nai 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 nai. Ai na nai nai nai. Ai nai nai nai. Ai na nai 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 nai. You know why the Hasidim sing nigunim on Shabbat afternoon? Instead of opening up a book of Zmirot with words. A lot of people think that when you sing a nigun, it's easy. I don't have to break my teeth on words I might not understand, in a language that I might not be comfortable in. You can just lie. And if I had words in front of me, I'd be forced to focus on how to pronounce them. What do they mean? What am I saying? The Lubavitcher Rebbe taught that it's exactly the opposite. that singing a nigun is really, really, really hard, singing a wordless melody. Why? It's when you're singing a song that has words in front of you, that's when you don't have to think. I don't have to think about what I want to say. I don't have to think about what my responsibility is to put out into the world. It's right here scripted for me. But when you sing a nigun, a melody without words, the invitation, no, the responsibility is to actually script that nigun yourself. To think about and identify the words that need to be placed into that melody. Making room for each of us to summon the words in each of our own hearts and minds so that they convey the message that we are each here in this moment to convey. That's why we sing nigunim. And don't be mistaken that it's easy. Bring to it an awareness of just how hard it is, and rise with me to the challenge. I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na na na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na na na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na na na, I na 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 na, I na 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 na, I na na na, I na 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 na. Shabbat is imagined as the weekly wedding with all of its beautiful rituals, the weekly wedding of the divine in Israel. I want to talk for a few moments about an image that we associate with a wedding, in a moment when the veil is lifted and two people who are covenanting themselves to one another for life are able to both see and reveal themselves to one another in the fullest sense. I want to talk for a moment about masks. In Parshat Tetzaveh, which we read this morning, we have, as I said, the continuing discussion of the construction of the Mishkan, the menorah, clothing for the Kohanim, the ordination rituals for Aaron and his sons. And as Roli spoke last night, Kabbalat Shabbat, about the beautiful garments for the Kohanim. These are garments that they wore when they were working in the Beit HaMikdash, direct antecedents of those that are now used in Roman Catholic and Greek Orthodox traditions. And especially we see among bishops robes that are similar to those described when they are presiding over ritual functions. We see even in our liturgy, we talk about God being robed. Adonai malach ge'ud lavesh lavesh Adonai oz hitazar, that the divine robes of beautiful strength and piety and pride. In Jewish life, we see the features of the clothing of the Kohanim preserved in some of the designs around our Torah mantles, in the embroidered coverings, in the sashes, crowned by pomegranates and bells. It's an interesting coincidence that this parasha that details the clothing of the priests is read on the eve of a holiday that asks us to dress up. But let's compare for a moment. In a simple, straightforward understanding of the tradition, our Purim costumes conceal our true identities, as Esther concealed hers from the king. But the Kohanim dressed in these beautiful, elaborate, textured, and colorful garments, not in order to conceal who they were, but precisely in order to bring out their inner spiritual beauty. As the Malbim says, their garments were external, but they symbolized their inner vestments. Right? And these garments were meant to inspire the improvement of their souls and their characters to be worthy of their sacred tasks as Kohanim. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz has a beautiful essay where he talks about how all of us wear masks. All of us wear costumes. All of us wear uniforms all the time, every single day. And we're constantly changing our masks and our costumes as we ourselves change. Oftentimes, over the course of a single day, we may go through those changes numerous times. There are professional ones that we wear at work. There are personal ones that we wear at home when we engage as partners or parents or grandparents. Almost all of the clothing, the masks, the uniforms that we don imply a certain role. We expect a doctor to appear in a certain way, or a business leader, or a rabbi, or someone who's on vacation. We change masks with our different roles. We also change masks with different people, and sometimes very quickly. You ever watch somebody work a room at a party? Or at Kiddush? Right? With some people who we encounter, we may engage in very serious conversations about serious things that we want to catch up on. With other people, we go over and we kibitz. With someone else, we may put on the costume of being merciful and compassionate for someone who's going through a painful or perilous moment. Sometimes we put these on consciously. We smile at parties, and we cry at funerals. We laugh sometimes at jokes that aren't funny. And sometimes we look like we're listening even if we're bored. You're all doing great. So some of them are unconscious and genuine, right? Sometimes we just smile because we're happy. We're not even aware of the fact that we're smiling. Sometimes we cry because we're sad even if we don't intend to. Sometimes we walk down the street with a scowl. We don't realize that we're scowling. We may be thinking about something. On more than one occasion, I have walked down Broadway and had somebody shout at me and say, "Smile!" I was like, what? Now, masks are not necessarily negative, because masks help us negotiate the society around us, and they may even play a very important role in helping us negotiate our relationships with one another. Sometimes our masks protect us, in the way that Esther's mask protected her, concealing her Jewish identity from the king and from Haman. Sometimes our masks protect others from us. Right? We can't just go up to people and say anything it is that we want to say to them, no matter how badly we want to say it. So sometimes our masks filter the words that come out of our mouths, which might otherwise be unkind or disrespectful. In the same way that a scuba mask might be life-saving, so too can the masks or the garments or the personas that we wear be soul-saving. We protect our bodies from excessive heat or cold by covering them, and so we sometimes protect our souls by covering them as well. And as Rabbi Steinsaltz points out, in the Midrash, we learn that at Sinai, God appeared to each person according to their own individual understanding. In our attempts to be godlike in our own lives, think of it as a divine gift to be able to appear differently to different people, depending on what the moment, what the interaction, what the relationship demands. Too often we dismiss this feature of social interaction as our just being chameleons, or being hypocritical, or being inconsistent. But that's too facile. Yes, sometimes we are all those things. But when we strive for truthfulness and for genuineness in our relationships, it just may be the case that there are different parts of ourselves that we share with different people, and that can be a tremendous source of blessing for us and for them. Just as God has multiple dimensions, so do we. So the question isn't, should we or should we not wear masks? Should we or should we not dress up? But the question really should be, what is the best mask for us to wear at any given moment? One that will bring out in us what we can most genuinely contribute to that moment, to that person, to that interaction. Now, it's true that sometimes we have different motives, and it's important to be mindful of our motives. Sometimes we make those choices because we want to conceal something about ourselves, as Esther did. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we can put on a mask or a costume because we want to pretend to be somebody whom we're not. Not unlike Yaakov, who pretended to be Esav in the costume that he put on. And both Esther and Yaakov learn the same lesson, which is what the Torah tries to teach us through these stories and I think through the details of this week's Parsha, which is that until you appear in this world in a manner that is true to yourself, that reflects the unique and authentic person that you are, you will not rise to the destiny that awaits you and to the destiny that you and only you can fulfill. The destiny for which you have been put on this earth. Until Esther revealed to Achashverosh who it is that she really was, there was no way she was going to be able to save her people. And even Yaakov, when he appeared as Esav, he did so in order to get the blessing from his father. But the blessing that he got, appearing as Esav, wasn't actually the blessing that he thought he needed to secure by any means possible. It wasn't the blessing of the Brit. The blessing that he got from Isaac when he was dressed up as Esav was a kind of general, you should live well and prosper. It wasn't the blessing that he needed to be blessed with in order to assume his role as the next leader of the Brit. He doesn't get that blessing until he appears before his father in the fullness of his own self. The fact that the Kohanim in the temple wore these elaborate costumes, again, wasn't an attempt to deny or to diminish themselves in the fullness and truth of who they were. They were garments chosen precisely because they inspired the Kohanim to rise to their most beautiful and holy, soulful presence before the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Just as sometimes we rise to the occasion of our clothing, when we feel good about ourselves because we are dressed in a certain way or we've made ourselves up in a certain way, so too can we rise to the occasion of our social clothing by choosing to don qualities and traits and behaviors that bring out the best in us and that summon the best of those in whose presence we find ourselves. So in bringing this teaching to a close, I ask you to consider What mask are you wearing right here, right now? What are some of the others that you regularly put on? Do they serve you? Do they represent you? Do they summon you to rise and manifest your true self? Do the masks you wear in this world invite those who see you to similarly rise to their own truest self? And lastly, what are you going to be for Purim this year? Here comes my third and a half teaching. I want to say I'm very, very honored that you're here tonight at this teaching. Rolly and Felicia, I appreciate so much your presence, and especially now as I try to share something that I have been wrestling with, and that I hope I will benefit from perhaps your thoughts as well. Several times in the last 24 hours, people have come up to me and said, but what about the ending chapters of the Megillah? What about those chapters that are so uncomfortable for us to talk about? Of Jews taking up arms and killing our enemies. And I share in my heart really what you expressed last night and you together with Felicia this morning. The sense of shame, the sense of embarrassment, the sense of disgust at the way members of the Jewish people have behaved in the last week. In the name of Torah, in the name of our people. I was speaking to a colleague on Friday about the challenge of Purim this year, about the challenge of a holiday that celebrates with revelry our own hatred of our enemies. And they shared with me that when they convene their community on Monday night for the reading of the Megillah, their intention is to instruct their community to put down the grogger. To put down the grogger, to not boo and hiss, because look at the trouble that that's gotten us into. And I've been wrestling. I want to share with you some thoughts that I'm not preaching, but that I'm inviting you to wrestle with along with me. What happened in Israel in terms of the retaliatory violence needs to be unequivocally condemned, as Rolly and Felicia have for all of us this morning, and as we have seen in the pages of Jewish media in courageous and bold statements. But I want to ask us to think about, that being the case, what do we do with our Jewish rage when innocent Jewish blood is spilled over and over and over again? Where do we put our pain and our suffering? There is no question, I can't say this enough times, there is no question that we need to put into place teachings and leadership and rules to never, ever, ever allow to stand that kind of murderous behavior in the name of Judaism, the Jewish people, and Jewish values. But what else do we need to do, create, offer to so many of us whose hearts are crushed by the ongoing suffering of the endless murdering of innocent Jewish lives too? Where do we put that? In a way that is productive, in a way that is humane, so that there are outlets other than the resorting to the kind of despicable, unspeakable Jewish violence. And I have images of, forgive the crudeness of this analogy, but I have images, I'm sure this in your own lives as well. Either as a parent or perhaps as a child, when you're filled with rage, you're furious about something. And I understand you're furious. Go to your room, grab your pillow, scream as loud as you want into your pillow. Get it out. Find a place for it. Raise your voice. But do not lift a finger. I ask you quite seriously, where do we put that anger? Without shame. I feel no shame for being angry at the murder of innocent Jewish children. I feel no conflict about my anger that innocent Jewish blood continues to be spilled. Where can we put that? Where can we put that without feeling embarrassed by that? So that we can constructively build a world not of vengeance but of love. I want to invite you to offer thoughts, questions, comments on this and any of the other questions that you've honored me by giving me the space to teach and to share with you tonight. Please. Hi, just can you speak up?
Friend of mine organizing one of the anti-Israel protests that are happening this weekend. And I have been very sad about that because it's been all over my emails or whatever, whatever I get. Communications in my profession. And this is a friend of mine, somebody who I've been present for so many difficult times of their lives, and he's so furious with Israel, not Jewish, but furious with Israel, taking ownership of this issue with rage that I understand, but why do I feel it so personally? And I feel the conflict of, I know, but it's just going back and forth, right?
I also just want to refresh your memories. Questions about new Jewish sources of inspiration for engagement in this time. Questions about building spaces that are expansive and inclusive. Questions about the masks that we wear and how we show up and appear and make ourselves manifest to one another. And then this question as well. Aviv.
Thank you. Israel was created to be a safe place for the Jews. The fact is, Israel is the most dangerous place for the Jews. Since the Oslo Accord, about 3,000 or more Jews were killed, many more injured. In no other country in the world you have so many Jews are killed. And it's bubbling in Israel. They don't know what to do. If they react, the world stand up. If they don't react, the Arabs celebrate and continue. I don't know where's the middle road, but it cannot continue. And the rage that the people showed, because two people standing in the parking, to continue to drive, and then somebody just come and lynch and kill them. So we just have to be sensitive, I think, to the Jewish rage and see where to take it from there.
I was thinking about what was said last night about masks and raiments, holy garments, and also about identity. And I was thinking about friends of mine who live on the Via Dolorosa in Jerusalem. I joke that they live in the original pre-war apartment. And one of the family members, he's a priest. He's an Armenian priest, Armenian family. They've lived there for generations. And he works at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And he used to wear his priestly vestments while coming and going. It's just a short walk, literally a couple of blocks to the church. And he told me, and this was back in 2016, that he had to stop wearing his vestments because the settlers would come and they would spit at him and call him names and other terrible things, which were, quite frankly, done to Jews. And still are done to Jews. So I just want to throw that out there in terms of rage. And I also think, here I am as a Jew hearing this. And so, and when I've been all over the Middle East, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey. I say I'm Jewish, say I'm queer, and I've been welcomed. So that's all I have to say.
I think some of the political stuff happening in Israel and U.S. is from revenge. It's all anger. And I think we have to work hard to stop that anger in ourselves and in both politically in Israel and here. And it's hard, but there's no other choice.
Thank you. My question is about your shiur, some of the thinking on the end of it. I kept sitting waiting, when is she going to talk about the Kohanim and the Choshen and the Evanim on their shoulders and the beauty of them? And then all of a sudden we were singing so sadly the 23rd Psalm, B'Tol Mavet, about death, what we sing at the Levaya and what we sing on Yizkor. And I was so happy thinking about what mask I'm wearing. So I just, your shiur I was so excited with it. This is not, this is a question of the thought that made you put it together. No criticism of any type.
Mizmor LeDavid is a song that is traditionally sung toward the last hour of Shabbat. It's not only, it's a psalm that's associated, of course, with moments of death and mourning, but fundamentally it's a song about hope and trust. Dafka, as we are preparing to make our way into what for so many in history and still for us today are perilous times that await us, times that require hope and trust. It's a song that is used to carry us over the threshold from the safety and sanctuary of community and prayer into the hard work of not just building and creating, but the hard work of love, the very, very hard work of love. When you love, I don't think there's any more expression of hope in the world than to actually allow yourself to love. And in a sense, that's what my very kind of confessional, help me here, please, was about. Because all I want to do is love.
So this might be too simplistic, but I kind of see the last few chapters of the book of Esther, and in addition, the pour out your wrath that we're going to recite a few weeks from now, as a catharsis. we don't want to bury these very real, painful feelings. Similarly, though, in certain communities, the catharsis isn't apparently working. It's safer to acknowledge the anger, to let it go, in Purim to revel in it. I kind of don't agree with the concept of let's not celebrate the hanging of Haman and his sons. I think this is how we can maybe release some of that tension, and not act on it. I mean, to me, it's essential that we have that and understand it and find its place for it so that we don't have it fester in us.
At the risk of being too provocative, I think we have to be really careful when we talk about innocent blood, because I think, yes, many of these people who've been killed by Palestinians have not done personally anything themselves. But we need also to think about the larger context in which this is all taking place, in which, we have a government that is treating people in the West Bank without any basic human rights, and talk about pent-up rage. I mean, when I visited there at the end of October, and I have to say I came back not understanding how there wasn't much more rage and much more violence and anger than we see. I mean, when you cage people up and don't allow them freedom to move, then when they strike out and when they deal with their anger, we need to take responsibility for both sides of that. I just felt like I needed to say that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that. I was going to go at it from a different point of view. You were saying, what do we do with this rage at innocent? What mechanism can we do to relieve our rage? And I would suggest perhaps pulling back and looking at the larger context and looking at why is this happening? Why are so many people there enraged at us? What is the context? What is perhaps our culpability in all of this? And in my own mind, I go right back to the first and second Aliyahs, end of the 19th century, and Herzl selling this movement as a land with no people for a people with no land, which we know now was not true. It was a densely populated land. And one can discuss all the ways in which it was mishandled, but there one is, and chickens are coming home to roost.
We have time for just a few more comments.
Thank you so much, Dini. This was, I think it's safe to say that we've all been so blessed and just it's so happy to have everybody be here together, to be learning. I'm here with my mother-in-law. She asked me if I knew anybody here. So that's just the first thing. So in terms of masks, I guess the mask I'm wearing is one of joy and gratitude for being surrounded by people that have taken care of me for many, many, many decades. So I feel very, very lucky indeed. But I think getting back to, so that's on a personal, but I think getting back to the very painful issues that we've all had to deal with those last chapters of Esther, but also that we're living them right now. So I had an experience just last Saturday, tiny microcosm, not a big deal. I was actually visiting my mother-in-law who lives right across the street. And I was in the elevator with, forgive me for saying this, with a very dapper-looking young guy, I'd say his early 40s, a modern Orthodox type. And I knew this precisely because he had the doorman, push the buzzer so that the elevator, he wouldn't have to push the elevator button. So I just asked him, remember last Saturday was the day of hate. So I asked him, how are things at your shul? And he said, everything was fine, we're all okay. And I said, thank God, Baruch Hashem, we're okay too. And I said, there are certain I try to soft pedal this. I said there are certain quarters in the Jewish world here in the United States that bear a great deal of responsibility for what is happening today, that today being last Saturday. I said they can't get in bed with Trump and with people like Sheldon Adelson giving millions and millions of dollars to support a white nationalist movement. He said, you make an interesting point. And he was uncomfortable. That's okay. I wanted him to feel uncomfortable. Because there's no way that this guy didn't vote straight, who. And so I think that what we need to do, though, is can we create a space like Rolly and Felicia did a few years ago, in the early days of Trumpism, where there were these encounters with, was it Michigan policemen? I'm forgetting exactly. Forget Michigan. How about we bring people like this otherwise very nice young guy that I was in the elevator with last week? Can we create our own kind of exchange program right here, where we really talk it out?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna make it really, really quick.
I'm going to paraphrase this. There's a story in the Talmud that when the Egyptians were crossing the Red Sea, the Red Sea colon killed the Egyptians, and the angels in heaven were celebrating, and they went to God, and God wasn't celebrating, and the angels went, God went, you don't expect me to celebrate the death of my creation. What's not spoken about is what happens right after it says in the Talmud. And the Talmud says, I don't know which rabbi it's attributed to, but it says Rabbi so-and-so says that God doesn't celebrate, but God causes others to celebrate. In other words, you should celebrate the death of your enemies. You should celebrate the death of Haman. He was the biblical version of Hitler. If I was alive in 1945 and I heard that Hitler was dead, I'd celebrate. So you do celebrate somebody who wants to kill you. So when we say today, when we talk about Haman and Haman dying, we should celebrate his death and those that want to destroy ours. God causes us to celebrate, and it's a reason we should celebrate.
I want to thank you all so much for your comments and thoughts, and I want to just offer one closing, I guess, offering from my own heart. My own heart, which, like so many of yours, has been shattered into a million pieces. Shattered into a million pieces of pain over the loss of all human life in the circumstances that we're talking about. We say in our tradition, no one's blood is redder than anyone else's. And for those of you who know me, you know that I don't purport my rage to be more rageful than anyone else's. And there is no question that there are larger systems which we have to do business with that are part of where responsibility lies for this endless cycle of suffering. And what I share with all of you, as those of you who have spoken, and I want to tie the different teachings that I brought tonight together by making a strong appeal to all of us, beginning with what I offered this morning. to understand how critical, serious, and robust, vigorous, and unrelenting engagement with the often messy and difficult world of politics, so that we can invest in and build the structures of responsibility in partnership with others around us, and understand the sources of inspiration for that work. For many of us living alongside more traditional sources of inspiration for public and loud Jewish engagement, but for many of us, for whom those traditional sources, or for our children or grandchildren, that might not be, what moves us into engagement, we have to recognize the urgency of this moment, to step up and engage in the ways that we can, to literally, through strengthening our democracies here and in Israel, build a world of love and safety that protects all life, and that allows the channeling of suffering and pain and heartbreak, which are inevitable in the messy work of building a world of love, to create space for those feelings to be deployed towards the strengthening of the relationships that continue to give us hope. In a world where we create more expansive spaces that are inclusive of many stories and that can hold the pain of not just our Jewish family and not just the Palestinian family, but of so many around the world who continue to suffer from being told that their lives and their needs and their destinies don't matter. And whatever mask it is, whatever costume it is in your closet that you can put on, that will inspire you to rise to the occasion of the work that is there for you to do, the work that is there for us to do together, I beg you, put on. Put on that mask, put on that costume, put on that uniform, and show up in the world as the human being, as the Jew, as the family member among the human family that you are, so that we can together, really and truly, never lose hope for the possibility of building an olam chesed, a world of love and dignity and peace for all of us. Olam chesed yibaneh, ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam chesed yibaneh, la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam chesed yibaneh, ya la 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 la, ya la la la. Olam chesed yibaneh, ya la 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 la, ya la la la. I want to thank you all so much for being in fellowship, in community together over this past Shabbat. I want to thank you, Penny, again, for giving me the honor of being able to share Torah once again here at BJ. And Roli, Felicia, thank you for your warm welcome. Before we make Havdalah, the ritual of separation between the sacred day of Shabbat and the rest of the days of the week, I remind you that we only need a separation ritual of any kind to make a division between two things that are inherently the same. Shabbat is meant to be a time that we work with the other days of the week to bring into that same spirit and that same energy. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are meant to, with our labor, become like Shabbat. So please consider this ritual of separation and transition one that will fortify us to make every day that we are gifted to be alive, a day that has the sanctity, a day that has the possibility and the hope of Shabbat itself. I want to share with you the prayer that I was taught to recite by my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and many before her in the moments before making Havdalah. If you know the words to it, please join me. It's just about the only Yiddish that I know, apart from a few other words that I won't repeat now in public. Gott von Avraham und Yitzchak und Yaakov, der liebe Shabbos Kodesh, geht der Werk der Woche nach Chedes, und kommt mit Mazel und Bracha, Glück und Gewinn, Amen, Amen. Once is not enough. You're supposed to say it 3 times. Gott von Avraham und Yitzchak und Yaakov und Sarah, Rivka, Rachel und Leah. Der liebe Shabbos Kodesh, geht der Werk der Woche nach Chedes, und kommt mit Mazel und Bracha, Glück und Gewinn, Amen, Amen, Shalom Yisrael. God von Avraham, the God of Avraham, Yitzchak and Yaakov, and although my grandmother might be turning in her grave, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. The Liebe Shabbos Kodesh geht der Weg, whose beloved Shabbos is about to leave. The Wochen der Kodesh sonst kommen, may it be that the new week that is coming be filled with mazel, with good fortune, with bracha, with blessing, with glick, with gvin, with joy and happiness. Is that right? Amen ve'amen. And shalom al Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. A week of peace for Israel, for all who call Israel home, and for the world itself. Please rise, and we'll turn off the lights for Havdalah. Avtach velo evchad, ki aziv zimrat Adonai vayhi li Yeshua, ushavta mayim beson mimaynei haYeshua, laDonai haYeshua lemcha berchatach hasela, Adonai tzvori manim miskav lanu Elohei Yaakov sela, Adonai tzroot asher damotech bach, Adonai Hoshia, HaMelech Yaneinu v'yom koreinu. From the Megillah. LaYehudim hayta ora v'simcha v'sason v'ikar kein tieh lanu kos Yeshuot esa u'v'shem Adonai yekra. Lai lai la 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 lai 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 la. La la la, ye la 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 la. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim borei minei besamim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei meorei ha'esh borei meorei ha'esh. Lai lai la 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 lai lai la la lai 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 la 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 lai lai la 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 lai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael le'amim ben yom hashvi'i l'sheshet yemei hamaseh baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Lai lai la 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 la. It's grape juice. Lai la na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai. Eliyahu hanavi, Eliyahu hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu hagilati, b'meira b'yameinu, yavo eleinu. Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David, Miriam HaNeviah, Oz veZimra beyada, Miriam tirkod itanu, lehagdil Zimrat olam, Miriam tirkod itanu, letaken et haolam, b'meira b'yameinu, hitevienu, el mei ha-Yeshua, el mei ha-Yeshua. Shavua tov, Shavua tov. Shavua tov. Shavua tov.